Sometimes life teaches us lessons in the most unexpected ways. What happens when someone who has never learned to respect boundaries meets someone who refuses to be a victim? This is the true story of Sarah Chen, a quiet office worker who had been practicing martial arts in secret for over a decade, and Marcus Webb, a man whose sense of entitlement was about to be shattered in front of an entire restaurant full of witnesses. In a world where bullies often go unchecked and victims suffer in silence, this story reveals what happens when the tables turn in the most dramatic way possible. It's a story about courage, consequence, and the power of standing up for yourself when it matters most. What you're about to read changed not just 2 lives, but the entire workplace culture of a major corporation, and sent shockwaves through a community that had grown too comfortable with tolerating unacceptable behavior. This isn't just about one moment of violence meeting swift justice. It's about the events that led to that moment, the people whose lives were forever altered, and the ripple effects that continue to this day. Some stories stick with you long after you hear them. This is one of those stories. Sarah Chen had always been the type of person others overlooked. At 28, she moved through the glass corridors of Meridian Financial like a ghost, her small frame and quiet demeanor making her nearly invisible to most of her colleagues. She preferred it that way. While others fought for attention in meetings and jockeyed for position around the coffee machine, Sarah focused on her work as a data analyst, finding comfort in numbers and spreadsheets that never lied or disappointed. What her co-workers didn't know was that every Tuesday and Thursday evening, after she left her beige cubicle and changed out of her conservative business attire, Sarah transformed into someone entirely different. At Master Kim's traditional Taekwondo academy, she wasn't the quiet girl who ate lunch alone. She was a second-degree black belt who could break boards with her bare hands and move with the fluid grace of someone who had dedicated over 12 years of her life to perfecting an ancient art. Sarah had started martial arts when she was 16, not long after her father left, and her mother began working double shifts to keep their small apartment. The local community centre offered free classes, and Sarah had initially joined hoping to make friends. She never expected to fall in love with the discipline, the mental clarity, and the way her body felt when she moved through complex forms. Her instructors quickly recognized her natural talent and dedication. While other students came and went, Sarah remained, advancing steadily through the ranks. Master Kim, a stern but caring man in his 60s, had become like a second father to her. He taught her that true strength wasn't about showing off or intimidating others. It was about discipline, respect, and using your abilities only when absolutely necessary to protect yourself or others. Sarah had taken these lessons to heart. In all her years of training, she had never used her skills outside the dojang, not even when bratty teenagers had tried to bully her in college, or when drunk men had bothered her at bars. At work, Sarah's cubicle was positioned in what everyone called the quiet zone, a section of the floor where the more introverted employees naturally gravitated. She shared this space with Janet, a soft-spoken accountant in her 50s who brought homemade cookies every Friday, and David, a programmer who communicated primarily through instant messages even when talking to people sitting 3 feet away. It was a peaceful corner of an otherwise hectic office environment. The peace began to crack the day Marcus Webb joined their department. Marcus arrived at Meridian Financial with the kind of confidence that immediately commanded attention. At 35, he was tall, broad-shouldered, and carried himself with the swagger of someone accustomed to getting his way. His resume was impressive. MBA from a prestigious university, 5 years at a top consulting firm, and recommendations that painted him as a dynamic leader ready to shake things up. Sarah's first encounter with Marcus happened on his second day. She was walking back from the printer, arms full of reports, when he stepped directly into her path. Instead of moving aside or apologizing, he looked her up and down with an expression that made her skin crawl. "Well, hello there," Marcus said, his voice carrying a tone that somehow managed to be both condescending and predatory. "I don't think we've been properly introduced. I'm Marcus Webb, the new senior analyst. And you are?" "Sarah Chen," she replied quietly, trying to step around him. But Marcus shifted, blocking her path again. "Sarah Chen," he repeated, as if testing how her name felt in his mouth. "That's a pretty name. You know, I haven't seen you around the office much. Do you always hide in the back?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't hide. I just prefer to focus on my work." Marcus laughed, but there was no warmth in it. "Focus on your work. How admirable. Well, Sarah Chen, I think you and I are going to get along just fine. I like the quiet ones." The way he said quiet ones made Sarah's stomach turn. She mumbled something about needing to get back to her desk and hurried away, feeling his eyes on her back the entire walk. When she reached her cubicle, her hands were shaking slightly as she set down the reports. Over the following weeks, Sarah began to notice a pattern. Marcus had a way of inserting himself into conversations, especially with the younger female employees. He would lean in too close, make comments about their appearance, and ask personal questions that crossed professional boundaries. Most of the women seemed uncomfortable, but didn't speak up. When they did try to redirect the conversation or create distance, Marcus would laugh it off as if they were being overly sensitive. Sarah watched Jennifer, a new marketing coordinator fresh out of college, struggle with Marcus's unwanted attention. He would find excuses to visit her desk multiple times a day, bringing her coffee she hadn't asked for, and lingering to make small talk that clearly made her uncomfortable. When Jennifer mentioned having a boyfriend, Marcus responded by saying he didn't see a ring and that she shouldn't limit her options. The situation with Jennifer escalated when Marcus started sending her emails that had nothing to do with work. He would compliment her outfits, ask about her weekend plans, and make suggestions about restaurants she should try, always with the implication that he would be happy to take her to these places. Jennifer confided in Sarah during lunch one day, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to do," Jennifer said, picking at her salad. "He hasn't technically done anything wrong, you know. He's never touched me or said anything explicitly inappropriate. But the way he looks at me, the way he always finds reasons to come to my desk, it makes me so uncomfortable." Sarah felt a familiar anger building in her chest. It was the same feeling she got when she watched movies where bullies terrorized innocent people, or when she read news stories about people who abused their power. But this wasn't a movie or a news story. This was happening right in front of her to people she cared about. "Have you talked to HR?" Sarah asked. Jennifer shook her head. "What would I say? That Marcus is being friendly? Daddy brings me coffee and asks about my weekend. They'll think I'm crazy or ungrateful. He's a senior analyst, and I'm just a coordinator. Who do you think they'll believe?" Sarah knew Jennifer was right. Marcus was careful to keep his behavior just on the edge of what could be considered inappropriate. He never crossed lines that would leave clear evidence, never said things that couldn't be explained away as friendly interest or professional networking. It was a calculated approach that spoke to experience. As the weeks passed, Sarah began to pay closer attention to Marcus's behavior. She noticed how he would stand too close to women in the elevator, how his hand would linger when he passed documents to female colleagues, how his compliments always seemed to focus on appearance rather than professional competence. She also noticed how he treated male colleagues completely differently, with respect, professional distance, and appropriate boundaries. The breaking point came during the company's quarterly team-building event. Meridian Financial had rented out a local restaurant for the evening, and employees were encouraged to bring spouses or partners. Sarah attended alone, as she usually did, planning to make a brief appearance before heading home to practice her forms. The restaurant was buzzing with conversation and laughter when Sarah arrived. She found a quiet corner near the bar and ordered a ginger ale, content to observe from the sidelines. She watched her colleagues in their casual clothes, seeing sides of them that the office environment usually kept hidden. Janet was telling animated stories about her grandchildren. David was actually speaking out loud and seemed almost social, and Jennifer looked more relaxed than Sarah had seen her in weeks. Marcus, however, was in his element. He worked the room like a politician at a campaign event, shaking hands, slapping backs, and charming everyone he encountered. But Sarah noticed how his behavior changed when he approached groups that included women. His voice would become more intimate, his gestures more theatrical, and his attention would focus almost exclusively on the female members of the group. As the evening progressed, Sarah watched Marcus gravitating more and more toward Jennifer. She was sitting at a table with several other marketing team members, laughing at someone's story about a client meeting gone wrong. Marcus approached the table carrying 2 drinks, set one in front of Jennifer without asking if she wanted it, and squeezed into the seat beside her. Sarah couldn't hear the conversation from her position across the room, but she could see Jennifer's body language change immediately. Her shoulders tensed. Her smile became forced, and she kept trying to include the other people at the table in whatever Marcus was saying to her. But Marcus seemed determined to create a bubble of intimacy between them, leaning in close, speaking directly into her ear, and placing his hand on her arm when he made points. Other people at the table began to look uncomfortable. The woman sitting across from Jennifer kept trying to catch her eye, clearly wanting to help, but not sure how to intervene. The men at the table seemed oblivious, continuing their own conversation about sports, while the drama unfolded right beside them. Sarah felt her training kicking in. Master Kim had always taught his students to be aware of their surroundings, to notice when situations were developing that might require intervention. He had emphasized that a true martial artist's first responsibility was to protect others, especially those who couldn't protect themselves. She was about to get up and walk over to the table when she saw Jennifer stand abruptly, mumbling something about needing the restroom. Marcus immediately offered to walk with her, but Jennifer declined and hurried away alone. Sarah watched Marcus watch Jennifer leave, his expression shifting from charming to calculating in a way that made her blood run cold. When Jennifer didn't return to the table after 10 minutes, Sarah decided to check on her. She found Jennifer in the restroom, standing at the sink with her hands gripping the edge of the counter. Her face was pale, and she looked like she might be sick. "Are you okay?" Sarah asked gently. Jennifer looked up, meeting Sarah's eyes in the mirror. "He won't leave me alone," she whispered. "He keeps buying me drinks even though I told him I don't want them. He's been touching my arm, my back, and he keeps talking about how we should get together outside of work to discuss my career development. I feel like I'm trapped." Sarah felt something cold and hard settle in her stomach. This wasn't just inappropriate workplace behavior anymore. This was predatory. "Do you want me to call you a cab?" Sarah offered. "You don't have to go back out there." Jennifer shook her head. "I can't just leave. People will notice, and tomorrow everyone will want to know what happened. If I make a big deal about this, it'll just make things worse for me at work." Sarah understood. Jennifer was caught in an impossible situation. Stay and endure Marcus's unwanted attention, or leave and face questions that would require her to either lie or admit that a senior colleague was making her uncomfortable. Either choice could damage her career. They returned to the main area together, and Sarah made sure to stay close to Jennifer for the rest of the evening. She noticed that Marcus seemed frustrated by her presence, shooting her annoyed looks whenever she joined conversations or positioned herself between him and Jennifer. But he couldn't do anything about it without looking obvious. The evening was winding down when things took a darker turn. Most employees had already left, and only about 20 people remained in the restaurant. Jennifer had relaxed slightly, thinking the worst was over, when Marcus appeared at her elbow with yet another drink. "One for the road," he said, pressing the glass into her hand despite her protests that she'd had enough and was driving home. "I really can't," Jennifer said, trying to hand the drink back to him. "I need to get going." Marcus's friendly mask slipped for just a moment, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something ugly underneath. "Come on, Jen, don't be such a party pooper. One drink won't kill you." The diminutive nickname made Jennifer flinch. She had explicitly told Marcus several times that she preferred to be called Jennifer, but he continued to use the shortened version as if they were intimate friends. Sarah stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. "She said she doesn't want the drink." Marcus turned to look at Sarah, as if noticing her for the first time all evening. His expression was cold, appraising. "I'm sorry, was I talking to you?" "No," Sarah replied calmly. "But Jennifer is my friend, and she's told you she doesn't want the drink. Maybe you should respect that." The small group of remaining employees had gone quiet, sensing the tension in the air. Even the restaurant staff seemed to be paying attention, slowing down their cleanup activities to watch the drama unfold. Marcus set the drink down on a nearby table with deliberate care, then turned back to Sarah. His voice was still conversational, but there was an edge to it that hadn't been there before. "You know what your problem is, Sarah? You don't know how to mind your own business. Jennifer is a grown woman who can speak for herself. She doesn't need some little mouse defending her." The word little hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but she kept her voice level. "You're right. Jennifer is a grown woman, and she's told you multiple times that she doesn't want your attention. Maybe you should listen to her." Marcus took a step closer to Sarah, using his height advantage to loom over her. It was a classic intimidation tactic, designed to make her feel small and vulnerable. In the old Sarah's world, it might have worked, but Master Kim had taught her years ago that true confidence came from within, not from physical size. "Maybe you should worry about your own social life instead of interfering in other people's," Marcus said, his voice dropping lower. "Although I can see why you might not have much experience with men showing interest in you." The insult was designed to hurt, to make Sarah retreat and leave Jennifer vulnerable. Sarah felt a flash of anger, but underneath it was something else, a crystalline clarity that she had only experienced a few times in her life, always during intense sparring matches when time seemed to slow down and every movement became deliberate and precise. "I think you should leave Jennifer alone," Sarah said quietly. "And I think you should go home now." Marcus laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Or what? What exactly are you going to do about it, little mouse?" The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen staff had stopped working to watch the confrontation. Jennifer stood frozen, her face pale with fear and embarrassment. Other colleagues looked uncomfortable, clearly wanting the situation to end but not knowing how to intervene. Sarah looked into Marcus's eyes and saw something that confirmed her worst fears about him. This wasn't just about drinks or unwanted attention. This was about power, about a man who had probably gotten away with this behavior his entire life because people were too intimidated or too polite to stand up to him. "I'm asking you nicely to leave her alone," Sarah repeated. "Don't make me ask again." Marcus's expression shifted from amusement to genuine anger. The mask was coming off completely now, revealing the entitled, aggressive personality that had been lurking beneath his professional exterior. "Are you threatening me?" he asked, his voice rising slightly. "Because that would be really stupid, even for someone like you." Sarah felt the familiar calm that always descended on her before sparring matches. Her breathing slowed, her muscles relaxed, and her mind became focused with laser intensity. She was aware of everything, the position of every person in the room, the location of tables and chairs, the distance between herself and Marcus, the way he was shifting his weight onto his forward foot. "I'm not threatening you," she said quietly. "I'm protecting my friend." And that's when Marcus made the biggest mistake of his life. His hand came up fast, palm open, aimed at the side of Sarah's face in what would have been a humiliating slap delivered in front of everyone she worked with. Time moved differently in that moment. Sarah saw Marcus's hand coming toward her face, as if she were watching it through water. Every detail was crystal clear. The way his fingers were spread wide, the slight tremor in his arm from too much alcohol, the ugly sneer that had replaced his practiced charm. She had perhaps half a second to react, but 12 years of training had prepared her for exactly this kind of moment. Sarah's body moved without conscious thought. Her right hand shot up and caught Marcus's wrist mid-swing, her fingers wrapping around it like a steel band. Her left hand moved simultaneously, grabbing his elbow and pulling it down, while twisting his wrist in a direction nature never intended it to go. The technique was called yaksu, or weak hand, and it was designed to control an attacker by manipulating the small bones and joints that couldn't resist torque. Marcus's confident expression transformed into shock, then confusion, then sudden sharp pain as Sarah applied pressure to his wrist. What happened next took less than 3 seconds, but those 3 seconds would be replayed in the minds of everyone present for years to come. Sarah stepped to her left, maintaining her grip on Marcus's wrist while her other hand pushed his elbow in the opposite direction. The movement was fluid, almost dance-like, but the result was devastating. Marcus's entire arm locked into a position that left him completely helpless. His shoulder was extended, his elbow was bent at an unnatural angle, and his wrist was twisted to the point where any movement in any direction would result in immediate, excruciating pain. "Let go of me," Marcus gasped, but even as he spoke, he realized he couldn't move without causing himself agony. Sarah hadn't just stopped his attack, she had turned his own arm into a prison. Sarah's voice was perfectly calm, almost conversational. "I told you to leave her alone." Marcus tried to pull away, but Sarah's grip tightened slightly, sending a jolt of pain up his arm that made him cry out. Several people in the restaurant started to stand up, unsure whether they should intervene or call for help. Jennifer stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth in shock. "You're going to break my arm," Marcus said, his voice higher than before, panic creeping in as he realized how helpless he was. Sarah looked into his eyes with the same calm expression she wore during meditation. "Only if you make me." For a few heartbeats, the restaurant was completely silent except for Marcus's labored breathing. Then Sarah began to speak, her voice carrying clearly to every corner of the room. "For months you've been making Jennifer uncomfortable. You've invaded her personal space, ignored her boundaries, and treated her like she exists for your entertainment. Tonight, you bought her drinks she didn't want, touched her without permission, and when she tried to leave, you wouldn't let her go." Marcus tried to interrupt, but Sarah increased the pressure on his wrist just enough to make him gasp. "I'm not finished. When I asked you politely to respect her wishes, you called me names and tried to humiliate me. And when that didn't work, you tried to hit me." She paused, letting her words sink in. Everyone in the restaurant was listening now, including the manager, who had emerged from the back office to see what was happening.
"Here's what's going to happen. Here's what's going to happen," Sarah continued.
"You're going to apologize to Jennifer. You're going to promise to leave her alone at work, and you're going to get help for whatever problem makes you think you can treat women this way." Marcus's face was red with pain and humiliation. "You can't do this to me," he wheezed. "This is assault. I'll have you arrested." Sarah's expression didn't change. "You tried to hit me first." Everyone here saw it. That's called attempted assault, and what I'm doing right now is called self-defense. She was right, and Marcus knew it. A dozen witnesses had seen him swing at her first, but the humiliation of being controlled so completely by someone he had dismissed as weak and helpless was almost worse than the physical pain. "Just let me go," he pleaded. "Apologize to Jennifer," Sarah repeated. Marcus looked around the room, seeing the faces of all his colleagues staring at him. Some looked shocked, others disgusted, and a few seemed almost pleased to see him brought down. He realized that his reputation, his carefully constructed image as a charming and successful professional, was crumbling in real time. "I'm sorry," he mumbled, not looking at Jennifer. "Louder," Sarah said. "And look at her when you say it." Marcus lifted his head and met Jennifer's eyes. "I'm sorry, Jennifer. I was wrong to make you uncomfortable." Jennifer nodded slightly, still too shocked to speak. Sarah studied Marcus's face, looking for signs of genuine remorse, but all she saw was anger and embarrassment. "Now promise to leave her alone," Sarah continued. "I promise to leave you alone," Marcus said through gritted teeth. Sarah held his gaze for another long moment, then slowly began to release the pressure on his wrist. But as soon as Marcus felt his arm beginning to move freely, his face contorted with rage and he tried to jerk away violently. It was the worst possible decision he could have made. Sarah had been prepared for exactly this reaction. As Marcus pulled back with all his strength, she didn't resist. Instead, she redirected his own force against him using a technique called himulio, or power borrowing. She stepped back and down while maintaining her grip on his wrist, using his own momentum to pull him off balance. Marcus stumbled forward, his arm extended and vulnerable. Sarah pivoted smoothly, still holding his wrist, and applied what Master Kim had always called the lesson maker. A joint lock that could either control someone gently or, with slightly more pressure, cause significant damage. The crack was audible throughout the restaurant. Marcus screamed and dropped to his knees as his radius bone snapped cleanly just above his wrist. Sarah immediately released his arm and stepped back, her hands raised in a non-threatening position. "Oh my God," someone whispered. Several people reached for their phones to call 911. Jennifer rushed forward, not to help Marcus, but to check if Sarah was okay. Marcus clutched his broken arm against his chest, his face white with shock and pain. "You broke my arm." He gasped in disbelief. "You actually broke my arm." Sarah looked down at him with the same calm expression she had maintained throughout the entire encounter. "You broke your own arm," she said quietly. "I just provided the fulcrum." The restaurant manager had called for an ambulance, and within minutes the place was filled with paramedics and police officers. As the EMTs worked to stabilize Marcus's arm, a police sergeant approached Sarah to get her statement. Officer Maria Gonzalez had been working downtown for 8 years, and she had seen plenty of bar fights and domestic disputes. But this was different. Instead of finding the typical scene of angry drunks throwing punches, she discovered a small, well-dressed woman sitting calmly at a table, giving her statement in a clear, measured voice to her partner, while a man twice her size was being loaded onto a stretcher. "Can you tell me what happened here tonight?" Officer Gonzalez asked Sarah. Sarah recounted the evening's events in precise detail, from Marcus's initial harassment of Jennifer, to his attempt to slap her, to the final moment when he had injured himself trying to escape her control. Her account was corroborated by more than a dozen witnesses, several of whom volunteered additional information about Marcus's pattern of inappropriate behavior at work. Jennifer, despite her shock, was able to give a clear statement about the months of unwanted attention and her fear when Marcus had cornered her earlier in the evening. Other female employees came forward with similar stories, painting a picture of a man who had systematically abused his position to intimidate and harass women. The most damning testimony came from David, the quiet programmer who had been sitting nearby and had recorded the final confrontation on his phone. The video clearly showed Marcus attempting to strike Sarah first, her defensive response, and his decision to violently pull away from her control. Officer Gonzalez reviewed the video twice before looking up at Sarah. "Ma'am, do you have any martial arts training?"
"Yes," Sarah replied.
"I've been studying Taekwondo for 12 years. I'm currently a second-degree black belt." The officer made notes in her report. "Have you ever used your training in a situation like this before?" Sarah shook her head. "Never. I've never had to defend myself or anyone else outside of the dujang." Officer Gonzalez had arrested dozens of people who claimed self-defense after seriously injuring someone in a fight. Most of them were lying, or at least exaggerating their fear to justify excessive force. But Sarah's demeanor, the witness statements, and the video evidence All supported her claim that she had acted appropriately to defend herself. The district attorney will review the case, Officer Gonzalez explained, but based on what I've seen tonight, I don't anticipate any charges being filed against you. Mr. Webb, on the other hand, will likely face charges for attempted assault. As the ambulance pulled away with Marcus inside, Sarah found herself surrounded by colleagues who looked at her with a mixture of amazement and newfound respect. Jennifer hugged her tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you," Jennifer whispered.
I was so scared, and I didn't know how to make it stop. Sarah hugged her back, feeling the adrenaline finally beginning to fade.
You don't have to be scared of him anymore. The restaurant manager, a middle-aged man named Tony, who had owned the place for 15 years, approached Sarah as the crowd began to disperse.
"Your dinner tonight is on the house," he said firmly. "And if that guy ever shows his face in here again, he'll be asked to leave immediately." Sarah thanked him, but she hadn't eaten anything and didn't think she could manage food right now. All she wanted was to go home, change into her training clothes, and spend some time with the heavy bag to process what had just happened. As she gathered her things to leave, Sarah noticed that several of her male colleagues were looking at her differently. Where they had barely acknowledged her existence before, she now saw a new wariness in their expressions. She realized that word of this incident would spread through the office by Monday morning, and her quiet, invisible existence at Meridian Financial was over forever. The drive home gave Sarah time to think about what had happened and what it might mean. She had spent years perfecting her skills, but always with the understanding that they were for discipline, fitness, and self-improvement. Master Kim had taught her that the greatest victory was the fight you never had to fight. Tonight, she had been forced to use her abilities to protect herself and Jennifer, but she took no pleasure in causing harm to another person. At the same time, she couldn't bring herself to feel guilty about Marcus's injury. He had made a series of choices that led to that moment, choosing to harass Jennifer, choosing to ignore Sarah's polite requests, choosing to attempt violence when he didn't get his way, and ultimately choosing to escalate the situation when he could have simply walked away. When Sarah arrived at her small apartment, she changed into her training uniform and spent an hour working through forms, letting her body move through the familiar patterns while her mind processed the evening's events. The physical activity helped her find her center again, reminding her of the principles that had guided her training for more than a decade. As she finished her practice and prepared for bed, Sarah reflected on how dramatically her life had just changed. Tomorrow, she would no longer be the invisible girl in the corner cubicle. She would be the woman who broke Marcus Webb's arm in front of half the company. Some people would see her as a hero, others as someone dangerous to be avoided. But most importantly, Jennifer would be safe. Other women in the office would know that someone was willing to stand up to bullies like Marcus, and Marcus himself had learned a lesson that would follow him for the rest of his life. Sarah had always believed that everything happened for a reason. Maybe she had spent 12 years preparing for this exact moment, training for a situation she never expected to face. Maybe all those hours in the dujang, all those lessons about respect and protection and standing up for what was right, had been leading to this. As she drifted off to sleep, Sarah's last thought was of Master Kim's favorite saying, "The warrior who wins without fighting has achieved the greatest victory, but the warrior who fights to protect others has achieved the greatest honor." Tonight, she had achieved both. Monday morning arrived with the kind of grey, drizzling rain that seemed to match Sarah's mood as she walked into the Meridian Financial Building. She had spent the weekend alternating between moments of pride in standing up for Jennifer and anxiety about how her life was about to change. The quiet anonymity she had treasured was gone forever, replaced by a notoriety she had never wanted. The elevator ride to the 15th floor felt longer than usual. Sarah could see her reflection in the polished steel doors. She looked the same as always, wearing her usual conservative navy blazer and carrying her worn leather bag. But inside, she felt fundamentally different, as if the events of Friday night had awakened something that couldn't be put back to sleep. The moment the elevator doors opened, Sarah knew that her fears about becoming the center of attention were justified. Conversation stopped mid-sentence as she walked through the corridor. Some colleagues smiled and nodded at her with newfound respect, while others quickly looked away, pretending to be absorbed in their phones or paperwork. The woman who had been invisible for 3 years was now impossible to ignore. Jennifer was waiting at Sarah's cubicle with 2 cups of coffee and a tentative smile. She looked better than she had on Friday night. The color had returned to her cheeks and her shoulders weren't hunched with tension. But there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept much over the weekend. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to talk about what happened," Jennifer said as Sarah sat down at her desk. "But I wanted you to know how grateful I am. I've been thinking about it all weekend, and I realize you probably saved me from something much worse than just harassment. Sarah accepted the coffee gratefully. How are you feeling? Relieved, Jennifer admitted. For the first time in months, I'm not dreading coming to work. I'm not constantly looking over my shoulder or planning escape routes from conversations. But I'm also worried about you. People are talking, and not everyone is saying nice things. Sarah had expected this. In any office environment, dramatic events created ripple effects that could last for months. Some people would see her as a hero who stood up to a bully, while others would view her as someone who had used excessive force against a colleague. The truth, as always, would be somewhere in between. What are they saying? Sarah asked. Jennifer hesitated, clearly not wanting to upset her. Some people are calling you a hero. Janet from accounting has been telling everyone that she's glad someone finally put Marcus in his place, but there are others who think you went too far. They're saying you're dangerous, that you could have handled it differently. Sarah nodded, unsurprised. She had broken a man's arm in front of their colleagues. Even though it had been in self-defense, even though dozens of witnesses could attest to Marcus's behavior, there would always be people who questioned whether such extreme force had been necessary. There's something else, Jennifer continued, lowering her voice. I heard that Marcus hired a lawyer. He's claiming that you assaulted him without provocation, and he's threatening to sue both you and the company. This news hit Sarah like a cold wave. She had been prepared for workplace gossip and awkward conversations, but the possibility of legal action was something she hadn't fully considered. Marcus had attempted to strike her first, and his injury had resulted from his own violent attempt to escape her defensive hold. But she knew that personal injury lawsuits could be complicated, especially when significant medical bills were involved. Before Sarah could respond, David appeared at the entrance to their cubicle cluster. The normally quiet programmer looked more animated than Sarah had ever seen him, clutching his phone with an expression of barely contained excitement. Sarah, he said, slightly out of breath. You need to see this. It's about Marcus. David held up his phone, showing a local news website. The headline read, Financial Executive Arrested for Assault After Restaurant Incident. Below, it was a photo of Marcus being led away from the hospital in handcuffs, his broken arm in a sling. He was arrested? Sarah asked, confused. I thought the police said they weren't pressing charges against me. Not you, David explained excitedly. Him. Apparently, after they reviewed all the witness statements and the video I took, the district attorney decided to press charges against Marcus for attempted assault. But that's not the best part. Look at this. David scrolled down to reveal another article from over the weekend. The headline made Sarah's blood run cold. Local man faces multiple harassment allegations following arrest. The article detailed how, following news of Marcus's arrest, several women had come forward with allegations of sexual harassment and inappropriate behavior spanning his entire career. Former colleagues from his previous job had contacted reporters with stories remarkably similar to what Jennifer had experienced. A woman from his graduate school had accused him of persistent stalking behavior that had forced her to change her thesis advisor and avoid certain parts of campus. Most damaging was an account from a junior analyst at his previous company who claimed Marcus had cornered her at a company retreat, made unwanted advances, and then retaliated professionally when she rejected him. She had never reported the incident at the time, fearing for her career, but seeing the news about his arrest had given her the courage to speak up. There are 6 women so far, David said, his voice filled with disgust. 6 different women from different jobs, different cities, all with basically the same story. The guy is a serial predator. Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions reading the articles. Relief that she wouldn't be facing legal action alone, vindication that her instincts about Marcus had been correct, but also sadness for all the women who had suffered in silence while he continued his pattern of abuse. Jennifer read over Sarah's shoulder, her face growing pale. I had no idea it was this bad, she whispered. I thought maybe I was overreacting, that I should just ignore it and hope it went away. You weren't overreacting, Sarah said firmly. And it wouldn't have gone away. Men like Marcus don't stop until someone stops them. The morning flew by in a blur of conversations as news of Marcus's legal troubles spread through the office. Sarah found herself in the unusual position of being approached by colleagues who had barely spoken to her before. Some wanted to express their support, others were curious about her martial arts background, and a few seemed to be fishing for details about the incident they could share as gossip. During lunch, Sarah escaped to the small park across the street from the office building. She needed space to think and process everything that was happening. The quiet bench by the fountain had always been her refuge during stressful days, but today even this peaceful spot felt different. She was surprised when her phone rang, displaying a number she didn't recognize with a local area code.
Hello, is this Sarah Chen? The voice was warm and professional, with a slight accent Sarah couldn't place. Yes, this is Sarah.
My name is Lisa Martinez, and I'm a reporter with Channel 7 News.
I'm working on a story about workplace harassment in the Marcus Webb case, and I was hoping I could speak with you about what happened Friday night. Sarah's heart sank. She had hoped to avoid media attention, but she realized that was probably naive given the circumstances. I'm not really comfortable talking to reporters, Sarah said carefully. I understand your reluctance, Lisa replied. But I think you should know that Mr. Wire, Webb's attorney, has been contacting media outlets with his version of events. He's portraying you as an aggressor who used excessive force against an innocent colleague. I think it's important that people hear the truth about what really happened. This changed things. Sarah had assumed that the video evidence and witness statements would speak for themselves, but she was beginning to understand that Marcus was going to fight back with everything he had. If he was already trying to control the narrative in the media, staying silent might not be an option. What kind of story are you planning to write? Sarah asked. I want to tell the story of workplace harassment and what happens when someone finally stands up to a predator. I've interviewed 3 of the women who've come forward with allegations against Mr. Webb, and their stories are heartbreaking. They all wish they'd had someone like you to protect them. Sarah found herself agreeing to meet with Lisa after work. As she hung up the phone, she realized that her quiet life was not just changed, it was over completely. She was about to become the public face of workplace harassment resistance, whether she wanted to or not. The afternoon brought unexpected visitors to her desk. First was Janet from accounting, who approached with tears in her eyes. I had to come thank you, Janet said, settling into the chair beside Sarah's desk. 20 years ago, when I was young like Jennifer, I had a boss who did things to me that I've never told anyone about. Back then, there was no HR department to complain to, no support system for women dealing with harassment. I just had to endure it and hope I could survive until I could find another job. She paused, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Watching you stand up to that man on Friday night, it healed something in me that I didn't even know was still broken. You did what I was never brave enough to do. After Janet left, Sarah was visited by Tom Richardson, one of the senior vice presidents. Tom was in his late 50s, with grey hair and the kind of conservative demeanor that had helped him climb the corporate ladder over 3 decades. Sarah had never spoken to him directly before, and his presence at her cubicle drew curious stares from nearby colleagues. Miss Chen, Tom said, settling his considerable bulk into the small chair that Janet had vacated. I wanted to speak with you personally about the incident Friday night. Sarah's stomach tightened. This was the conversation she had been dreading. The one where she would be told that while the company supported her right to defend herself, perhaps it would be best for everyone if she found employment elsewhere. I've spent the weekend reviewing witness statements and consulting with our legal team, Tom continued. I want you to know that Meridian Financial stands behind you 100%. What you did took tremendous courage, and you have our full support. Sarah blinked in surprise. Thank you, sir. I also want you to know that we've been conducting our own investigation into Mr. Webb's behavior since he joined the company. Your actions on Friday night may have prevented a much more serious incident. We believe he was escalating his behavior, and that someone could have been seriously hurt if this pattern had continued. Tom leaned forward, his expression serious. The company is prepared to provide you with legal representation if Mr. Webb follows through on his threats to sue. We're also implementing new harassment prevention training and establishing a confidential reporting system so that future situations like this can be addressed before they reach a breaking point. As Tom stood to leave, he paused and looked back at Sarah. I have a daughter about your age, Mr. Call. Chen. I hope that if she ever finds herself in a situation like the one you faced, she has the training and the courage to protect herself the way you did. The workday ended with Sarah feeling emotionally drained but oddly hopeful. The support from her colleagues and company leadership had been overwhelming, and the news about Marcus facing serious legal consequences felt like justice being served. But she knew that the real test would come in the days and weeks ahead, as the media attention intensified and the legal proceedings began. As she packed up her desk, Jennifer approached one final time. I just wanted to tell you something, Jennifer said, her voice steady and clear. I've decided to testify if Marcus's case goes to trial. I was scared before, but after reading about all those other women, I realized that staying silent only helps him hurt more people. Sarah smiled at her friend. I'm proud of you. That takes real courage. I learnt it from watching you, Jennifer replied. You showed me that sometimes the scariest thing to do is also the right thing to do. As Sarah left the office building, she reflected on how dramatically her life had changed in just 4 days. The quiet, invisible existence she had built for herself was gone, replaced by a visibility that made her uncomfortable but also empowered. She had become a symbol of something larger than herself, the idea that ordinary people could stand up to bullies and predators when institutions and systems failed to protect the vulnerable. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: the media interview, potential legal proceedings, and the ongoing adjustment to her new status at work would all require strength she wasn't sure she possessed. But for tonight, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. The satisfaction of knowing that she had used her abilities exactly as Master Kim had taught her, to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. The quiet girl in the corner cubicle was gone forever. But maybe that wasn't such a bad thing after all. 3 months after the restaurant incident, Sarah found herself sitting in the witness box of courtroom 4B, looking out at a packed gallery that included reporters, colleagues, and supporters. The civil trial of Webb versus Chen had become something of a local sensation, drawing attention from women's rights groups, workplace advocacy organizations, and martial arts communities across the region. Marcus Webb sat at the plaintiff's table, his expensive suit unable to disguise the defeated slump of his shoulders. His arm had healed, but his life had unraveled completely in the weeks following his arrest. He had been fired from Meridian Financial, faced criminal charges for attempted assault, and was now desperately trying to salvage something from the wreckage through this lawsuit. His attorney, a sharp-dressed man named Richard Thornton, had built their case around the claim that Sarah had used excessive force and that her martial arts training made her a deadly weapon, who should have found a non-violent solution to the conflict. They were seeking damages for medical expenses, lost wages, emotional trauma, and what Thornton dramatically called the permanent damage to Mr. Kamen. Webb's reputation and career prospects. Sarah's attorney, Maria Santos, was a veteran civil rights lawyer who had volunteered to represent her pro bono. After reading about the case, Maria specialized in workplace harassment cases and had immediately recognized the broader implications of Marcus's lawsuit. If he succeeded, it would send a chilling message to anyone who might consider standing up to workplace predators. The trial had lasted 4 days already, with testimony from witnesses, expert analysis of the restaurant video, and detailed examination of Marcus's pattern of harassment. The most powerful moments had come when Jennifer and 3 other women from his previous workplaces had testified about their experiences with Marcus's predatory behavior. Now it was Sarah's turn to tell her story. "Miss Chen," Maria began, her voice calm and professional, "can you tell the court about your martial arts background?" Sarah took a deep breath, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. "I started training in Taekwondo when I was 16. I currently hold a 2nd-degree black belt, which I earned last year after 12 years of consistent practice. And in all those years of training, had you ever used your skills outside of the martial arts studio? Never. My instructor, Master Kim, always taught us that our training was for self-defense only, and that the highest goal was to avoid fights altogether." Maria walked Sarah through the events of that Friday night, from Marcus's harassment of Jennifer to the final moment when his arm broke. Sarah's testimony was precise and unemotional, sticking to the facts without editorializing about Marcus's character or motivations. "When Mr. Webb attempted to strike you," Maria asked, "what went through your mind?" "I was scared," Sarah answered honestly. "Not of being hurt, but of what might happen to Jennifer if I didn't stop him. His behavior had been escalating all evening, and I could see that he was becoming more aggressive and less concerned about consequences." "Why didn't you simply walk away or call for help?" "There wasn't time. His hand was already coming toward my face. In martial arts, we learn that you have a split second to react when someone attacks you. You can't call for help or run away when someone is actively trying to hurt you." Thornton's cross-examination was aggressive and theatrical, clearly designed to paint Sarah as a dangerous vigilante who had overreacted to a minor workplace dispute. "Ms. Chen," he began, pacing dramatically in front of the witness box, "you claim that Mr. Webb was harassing Ms. Zappa. Rodriguez, but isn't it true that you had no direct knowledge of any criminal behavior?" "I witnessed him making Jennifer uncomfortable, ignoring her requests to be left alone, and cornering her at the restaurant," Sarah replied calmly. "But you never saw him commit any crime, did you?" "No assault, no battery, no explicit threats?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I saw him create a hostile environment for a co-worker and then attempt to strike me when I intervened." Thornton seized on this. "Attempt to strike you? Isn't it possible that Mr. Webb was simply gesturing with his hands while speaking, And you misinterpreted his movements? Maria stood up. Objection, Your Honor. The video evidence clearly shows Mr. Webb's aggressive motion toward Miss Chen. Sustained, Judge Patricia Wells replied. The jury has seen the video, Counselor. Thornton tried a different approach. Miss Chen, you've described your martial arts training as being focused on self-defense. But isn't it true that you're trained to seriously injure attackers? I'm trained to protect myself and others using the minimum force necessary, Sarah responded. Every technique I've learned can be applied with varying degrees of force. But you chose to apply enough force to break Mr. Webb's arm, didn't you? Sarah felt a flash of anger, but kept her voice steady. Mr. Webb broke his own arm by violently pulling away from a control hold. I was trying to restrain him, not injure him. Come now, Miss Chen. You're a trained fighter. Are you seriously claiming that you couldn't have found a way to stop Mr. Frank Webb without causing him permanent injury? This was the question Sarah had been dreading, because it forced her to explain something that people without martial arts experience rarely understood. She looked directly at the jury before answering. In the moment when someone is attacking you, you don't have the luxury of considering every possible option. You react based on your training, and my training taught me to control the attacker and neutralize the threat. When Mr. Webb tried to break free violently, he put himself at risk of injury. I couldn't control his reaction to the restraint. The cross-examination continued for another hour, with Thornton attempting to portray Sarah as someone who had been looking for an excuse to use violence. But his aggressive questioning began to backfire when several jury members visibly reacted negatively to his tone and approach. The most damaging moment for Marcus's case came during his own testimony. Thornton had clearly coached him extensively, and his account of the evening was dramatically different from the version supported by video evidence and witness testimony. According to Marcus, he had simply been trying to be friendly with Jennifer and had been unjustly attacked by Sarah when he made what he called a casual gesture during conversation. But under cross-examination by Maria Santos, his story fell apart completely. Mr. Webb, Maria began, you testified that you were simply being friendly with Ms. Rodriguez. But according to multiple witnesses, she repeatedly asked you to leave her alone throughout the evening. Is that your definition of friendship? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I thought she was just being shy. Some women need a little encouragement to open up. I see. And when Miss Chen asked you to respect Miss Chen, Rodriguez's wishes, you called her a little mouse, didn't you? I may have used those words, but it was just a figure of speech. Maria approached the witness box with a transcript in her hand.
According to witness testimony, you also said that Ms.
Chen should worry about her own social life instead of interfering, and that she probably didn't have experience with men showing interest in her. Do you recall saying those things? Marcus's face reddened.
I was frustrated.
She was interfering in a private conversation. A private conversation in which Mrs. Rodriguez was clearly uncomfortable and trying to leave. She wasn't trying to leave. That's ridiculous. Maria walked to the evidence table and picked up a photograph. Mr. Webb, do you recognize this image from the restaurant's security camera? The photograph showed Jennifer clearly backing away from Marcus while he leaned toward her, his hand on her arm. Her body language was unmistakably defensive, and her facial expression showed obvious distress.
That's taken out of context, Marcus said weakly.
What context would make this appear to be a friendly conversation between willing participants? Marcus had no answer that didn't make him look worse, so he remained silent. Mr. Webb, let's talk about your gesture that Miss Chen misinterpreted. The video shows your hand moving rapidly toward her face in what appears to be a striking motion. Can you demonstrate for the jury what you claim was simply a casual gesture? This was a trap, and Marcus seemed to realize it. Any demonstration he provided would either look exactly like an attempted slap proving Sarah's version of events, or would look nothing like what was captured on video, undermining his credibility. I can't recreate the exact circumstances, he said lamely. Because the exact circumstances involved you attempting to strike Miss Chen, didn't they? No, that's not what happened. Maria played the restaurant video one more time, asking the jury to focus on Marcus's facial expression, his body language, and the speed and trajectory of his hand movement. Even without sound, the aggressive intent was obvious. The final nail in Marcus's case came when Maria introduced evidence about his pattern of behavior with other women. Despite Thornton's objections, Judge Wells allowed testimony about his history of harassment because it was relevant to his state of mind and intent on the night in question. One by one, former colleagues testified about Marcus's inappropriate comments, unwanted touching, and retaliation against women who rejected his advances. The pattern was consistent across multiple workplaces and years, painting a picture of a man who felt entitled to women's attention and became aggressive when denied. The most compelling witness was Dr. Emily Carter, a forensic psychologist who had studied workplace predators for over 15 years. She explained to the jury how men like Marcus typically escalated their behavior over time, becoming more bold and aggressive when their actions went unchallenged. Predators like Mr. Joe Webb rely on their victims' reluctance to cause a scene or challenge authority figures, Dr. Carter explained. They choose targets who seem vulnerable or isolated, and they count on bystanders to remain passive. When someone like Miss Chen intervenes, it disrupts their entire strategy. In your opinion, Maria asked, what might have happened if Ms. Chen had not intervened that night? Based on Mr. Webb's escalating pattern of behavior and his obvious intoxication that evening, I believe there was significant risk of sexual assault. He had isolated Ms. Rodriguez, ignored her attempts to resist his advances, and was becoming increasingly aggressive when his behavior was challenged. Thornton's closing argument was a last-ditch effort to convince the jury that Sarah had overreacted to a minor social conflict and that her martial arts training made her response unreasonably dangerous. He painted Marcus as the victim of excessive force and asked for substantial damages to compensate for his injuries and ruined career. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Thornton declared, Mr. Webb may not be a perfect man, but that doesn't give anyone the right to break his bones. Ms. Chen had other options available to her, and she chose violence. Maria's closing argument was more measured, but more powerful. She reminded the jury of the video evidence, the pattern of harassment, and the testimony of multiple women who had been victimized by Marcus's behavior. This case isn't really about a broken arm, Maria said, making eye contact with each juror. It's about whether we as a society will protect predators or protect their victims. Sarah Chen did what our institutions failed to do. She stopped a dangerous man from hurting someone else. If we punish her for that, we send a message that women should remain silent and passive in the face of harassment and assault. She paused, letting her words sink in. Mr. Webb's arm healed in 6 weeks. The damage he caused to his victim's sense of safety and self-worth may never heal. Sarah Chen prevented him from creating another victim, and for that, she deserves our gratitude, not our condemnation.
The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours before returning with a unanimous verdict in Sarah's favor.
They found that Marcus had attempted to assault Sarah, that her response had been reasonable and proportionate, and that his subsequent injury was the result of his own actions. As the verdict was read, Sarah felt a complex mix of emotions: relief at being vindicated, satisfaction at seeing justice served, but also sadness that it had taken a public trial to establish something that should have been obvious to anyone who witnessed the events. After the trial, Sarah was approached by dozens of reporters and supporters, but the person she was most happy to see was Master Kim, who had attended every day of the proceedings despite his busy schedule. I'm proud of you, he said simply, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. You used your training exactly as you were taught, to protect someone who couldn't protect herself. That is the highest calling of a martial artist. Outside the courthouse, Jennifer was waiting with a group of other women who had testified during the trial. They had formed an unexpected support network, bonded by their shared experiences with Marcus and their courage in speaking out against him. What happens now? Jennifer asked. Sarah looked around at the reporters, the supporters, and the women who had become her friends through this ordeal. Her quiet life was gone forever, but maybe that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Now, she said with a smile, we make sure this never happens to anyone else. The trial was over, but Sarah's real journey was just beginning. 2 years after the trial that made national headlines, Sarah Chen stood in front of a packed auditorium at the downtown community center, looking out at an audience of over 300 women, ranging in age from teenagers to grandmothers. The banner behind her read, Defend Yourself, Define Yourself, Self-Defense and Empowerment Workshop, and the energy in the room was electric with anticipation and determination. Sarah's life had transformed in ways she could never have imagined. The quiet data analyst who had once hidden in her corner cubicle had become one of the most recognizable advocates for workplace safety and women's self-defense in the region. But the journey to this moment had been far from easy. In the months following the trial, Sarah had been overwhelmed by requests for interviews, speaking engagements, and appearances at women's events. She had initially resisted most of these opportunities, still preferring privacy to publicity. But a conversation with Dr. Emily Carter, the psychologist who had testified in her trial, had changed her perspective. "You have something that very few people possess," Dr. Carter had told her over coffee 6 months after the verdict. "You have the skills to protect yourself, the courage to use them when necessary, and now you have a platform to teach others. Think about how many women could benefit from learning what you know." That conversation had planted a seed that grew into what Sarah now called her second career. Working with Master Kim and several other martial arts instructors, she had developed a curriculum that combined basic self-defense techniques with confidence-building exercises and situational awareness training. The program, which they called Inner Strength Outer Defense, had started small, with weekend workshops at the community center. But word spread quickly, and soon Sarah was traveling to corporations, colleges, and community organizations throughout the state to teach women how to protect themselves. Tonight's workshop was special because it marked the 2-year anniversary of the restaurant incident, and because Jennifer Rodriguez was serving as Sarah's co-instructor for the first time. Jennifer's transformation had been as dramatic as Sarah's, though it had taken a different path. After the trial, she had left her job at Meridian Financial to pursue a law degree, specializing in employment and civil rights law. She was now in her final year at law school and had already accepted a position with a firm that specialized in representing harassment victims. "Good evening, everyone," Sarah began, her voice carrying easily to the back of the auditorium without a microphone. Years of public speaking had given her a confidence that would have been unimaginable to her younger self. "My name is Sarah Chen, and this is Jennifer Rodriguez. We're here tonight because we believe that every woman has the right to feel safe, whether she's at work, at home, or anywhere else in the world." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience. Sarah could see faces that reflected every emotion from determination to fear to anger. She recognized the expression she had seen in mirrors for most of her life. The look of someone who felt powerless and wanted to change that feeling. 2 years ago, Sarah continued, I was forced to use my martial arts training to defend myself and protect a friend from a man who refused to accept the word no. That incident changed both of our lives dramatically, and it taught us some important lessons that we want to share with you tonight. She paused, making eye contact with several women in the front rows. The first lesson is that predators count on your silence, your politeness, and your fear of making a scene. They rely on the assumption that you won't fight back, that you'll endure harassment rather than risk confrontation. Sarah gestured to Jennifer, who stepped forward with the same confidence she now carried into courtrooms. The second lesson, Jennifer said, is that the legal system and workplace policies, while important, often aren't enough to protect you in the moment when you need protection most. You have to be prepared to protect yourself. For the next 3 hours, Sarah and Jennifer led the audience through a comprehensive program that combined practical self-defense techniques with psychological preparation and legal education. They taught basic strikes, escapes from grabs, and situational awareness skills. But they also discussed recognizing predatory behavior, documenting harassment, and knowing when and how to report incidents to authorities. The most powerful part of the evening came during the personal story segment. Sarah had learned that hearing from other women who had faced similar situations was often more impactful than any technique demonstration. Maria Santos, Sarah's former attorney, spoke about her own experience with workplace harassment early in her career and how it had motivated her to become a civil rights lawyer. Dr. Emily Carter discussed the psychology of predators and why traditional advice to just ignore them often made situations worse rather than better. But the most moving testimony came from an unexpected source. Janet, the quiet accountant from Meridian Financial, had asked to share her story publicly for the first time. 40 years ago, Janet began, her voice shaking slightly. I was a young secretary at a law firm downtown. My boss was a man very much like Marcus Webb, charming, successful, and completely convinced that the women in his office existed for his entertainment. The auditorium was completely silent as Janet described months of escalating harassment that culminated in an assault in her boss's office after hours. I never reported it, she said, tears streaming down her face. I was too ashamed, too scared, too convinced that no one would believe me over a successful lawyer. She looked directly at Sarah. When I saw you stand up to Marcus that night, it healed something in me that had been broken for decades. You did what I was never brave enough to do, and you inspired me to finally tell my story. The audience gave Janet a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. As the applause died down, Sarah saw that there wasn't a dry eye in the auditorium. During the question and answer session, a college student raised her hand. I'm being harassed by a professor, but he's really careful about it. He never does anything when other people are around. and he always makes it seem like I'm misunderstanding his intentions. How do you deal with someone like that? Jennifer fielded this question, drawing on her legal training and her own experience with Marcus's manipulative tactics. Document everything, she advised. Keep a detailed record of every incident, including dates, times, witnesses, and exact quotes when possible. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is, Sarah added. And remember that you don't have to handle it alone. Find allies, whether they're friends, family members, counselors, or advocacy organizations. Predators prefer isolated victims. An older woman in the back raised her hand. What about those of us who aren't young and athletic? I'm 65 years old and barely 5 feet tall. Can someone like me really learn to defend herself? Sarah smiled. Some of our most effective students have been women in their 60s and 70s. Self-defense isn't about overpowering an attacker. It's about using technique, surprise, and determination to create an opportunity to escape. Age and size matter much less than you might think. To demonstrate her point, Sarah called Janet to the front of the auditorium. At 58 and barely over 5 feet tall, Janet looked like the least threatening person imaginable. But under Sarah's guidance, she demonstrated several simple but effective techniques for breaking free from grabs and creating distance from attackers. The key, Sarah explained as Janet returned to her seat beaming with pride, is that most attackers expect compliance. They expect you to freeze, to submit, to make their job easy. Any resistance, even from someone smaller and older, can disrupt their plans enough to give you a chance to escape. As the evening wound down, Sarah reflected on how far she had come from the frightened, invisible woman who had hidden in her corner cubicle. The transformation hadn't always been comfortable. She still sometimes missed the anonymity and simplicity of her old life. But she had found a purpose she had never expected, and a community of strong women who supported and inspired each other. After the last question was answered and the audience began to disperse, Sarah was approached by a teenage girl who had attended with her mother.
Ms.
Chen, the girl said, I wanted to thank you for what you did. Not just tonight, but 2 years ago. My mom has been telling me about your story since it happened, and it made me want to start taking martial arts classes. The girl's mother nodded gratefully. Emma has been so much more confident since she started training. She stands up straighter, speaks up more in class, and carries herself differently. Your example showed her that she doesn't have to accept being treated badly by anyone. Stories like Emma's had become common in Sarah's life, but they never failed to move her. She was particularly gratified to hear from young women who had been inspired to start training, to speak up for themselves, or to support their friends who were facing harassment. As Sarah and Jennifer packed up their equipment, they were joined by Master Kim, who had helped with the demonstration portions of the evening. At 72, he moved with the same fluid grace that had first inspired Sarah 16 years earlier, and his presence lent credibility to their program that she deeply valued. I'm proud of both of you, he said, carefully wrapping the practice pads they had used for striking demonstrations. You've taken the principles we teach in the Dujang and found a way to share them with people who need them most. Jennifer smiled. Sarah taught me that martial arts isn't just about the physical techniques. It's about finding the strength to stand up for yourself and others, even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared, Sarah corrected. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's taking action despite your fear. As they walked to their cars in the community center parking lot, Sarah's phone buzzed with a text message. It was from a woman who had attended one of her workshops 6 months earlier. Sarah, the message read, I wanted you to know that I used what you taught me last night. A man followed me from the bus stop and tried to grab me, but I remembered your lessons about awareness and escape techniques. I got away safely and called the police. Thank you for giving me the tools to protect myself. Sarah showed the message to Jennifer, who read it with a mixture of pride and sadness. I hate that she had to use what we taught her, Jennifer said, but I'm so glad she was prepared. This was the reality that motivated Sarah's work, the knowledge that women faced these dangers every day and that preparation and training could mean the difference between becoming a victim and remaining safe. As she drove home that night, Sarah thought about the path that had led her from that corner cubicle to this unexpected calling. She had never planned to become a public figure or an advocate for women's safety. She had simply been a woman who refused to let a bully hurt her friend and who had the skills and courage to stop him. But sometimes, she reflected, the most important changes in our lives come from moments we never planned for, choices we never expected to make, and courage we didn't know we possessed until we needed it most. The restaurant incident that had changed everything lasted less than 5 minutes, but its ripple effects continued to spread. Marcus Webb had been convicted of attempted assault and was serving a brief jail sentence before beginning mandatory anger management and harassment counseling. Several other men in similar positions had been held accountable for their behavior as women found the courage to speak up. More importantly, hundreds of women had learned to defend themselves. Thousands more had heard the message that they didn't have to tolerate harassment. And a new generation of young women was growing up with the knowledge that they had the right to set boundaries and the power to enforce them. Sarah's apartment was quiet as she changed out of her workout clothes and prepared for bed. The walls were now covered with photos from workshops, thank you letters from participants, and certificates recognizing her advocacy work. Her life was fuller and more meaningful than she had ever imagined possible. But in one corner of her bedroom, in a place of honor, hung her original black belt certificate from Master Kim's Dujang. It reminded her every day of the foundation that had made everything else possible, the years of training, discipline, and character development that had prepared her for a moment she never saw coming. As she turned off the lights, Sarah's last thought was of all the women she had met that evening, who were going home with new knowledge, new confidence, and new hope. Tomorrow, they would be a little bit safer, a little bit stronger, and a little bit more prepared to stand up for themselves and others. The quiet girl in the corner cubicle was truly gone forever. But the woman who had taken her place was someone Sarah was proud to be. She had learned that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to let bullies win, even when the cost is higher than you ever expected to pay. Sometimes, changing the world starts with a single moment of courage. Sometimes it starts with someone who has had enough and finally says no. Sometimes it starts with a broken arm and a lesson that echoes far beyond the moment when it was taught.